The morning sun, barely cutting through the dense English fog over the West Midlands, does little to lift the heavy, almost solemn atmosphere hanging around the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham. It is an area designed for massive public gatherings, for cheering crowds and the roaring energy of international spectacles. Yet on this particular Friday, it feels strangely hollow, almost deserted. Only a small, select group of journalists and media personnel stand, huddled together against the early chill, their breath misting in the cool air. Cameras poised, waiting for an arrival that everyone assumed would be tense, perhaps even somber. After all, the headlines of the past week had been nothing short of brutal, detailing deep legal setbacks and high-profile defeats in the halls of justice that would leave almost any individual reeling under the weight of public scrutiny and official rejection. The narrative seemed entirely set for a quiet, determined appearance. A moment where a man would simply put on a brave face, offer a polite, tight-lipped smile to the flashing lenses, and quickly retreat back into the shadows of his highly guarded private life. But history has a strange way of defying expectations. And what happened when the doors finally opened left those in attendance completely bewildered, shifting the entire energy of the room in an instant, and setting off a chain reaction of whispers that would soon echo all the way to the highest corridors of royal power. Instead of a figure weighed down by the intense pressure of recent events, the Duke of Sussex literally bounded into the bleak, half-empty exhibition center with an unmistakable surge of energy, a massive, unyielding smile plastered across his face that seemed entirely at odds with the current public narrative. There was no sign of the traditional, sometimes grumpy demeanor that often characterizes his relationship with the British press corps, particularly during moments of intense personal or legal crisis. He moved with the absolute confidence of a man who possessed a profound, hidden secret, completely unbothered by the empty rows of seats or the stark, utilitarian aesthetic of the media event, marking the one-year countdown to the next Invictus Games. For the seasoned royal correspondents standing within the press pen, men and women who have spent decades learning to read the subtle body language and minuscule shifts in temperament of the House of Windsor, this radiant, almost triumphant joy was an immediate, unmistakable red flag. A man who has just lost a monumental court case regarding his personal security and public standing does not exude this level of pure, unadulterated satisfaction without a very significant, very powerful reason hiding just beneath the surface. As the cameras clicked away, capturing this unexpected display of high spirits against the bleak background of the Birmingham venue, a quiet hum of intense speculation began to ripple through the journalists, a collective realization that something monumental was shifting behind closed doors. Far away from the official itinerary, it was in that exact moment of growing bewilderment that the first solid pieces of information began to circulate, transforming what had been vague, speculative murmurs into a tangible, high-stakes reality that sent shockwaves through the gathered press pack. A highly respected royal editor, known across the industry for maintaining exceptionally reliable and deep connections within the Sussex organization, was spotted in the media enclosure looking remarkably pleased with himself, having just published a definitive update on his network website. This wasn't merely another piece of internet gossip or an unsubstantiated rumor thrown out to generate temporary clicks. It was an explicit, authoritative declaration that a long-awaited, deeply controversial event was actively unfolding behind the scenes. Word spread like wildfire through the tight-knit group that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, along with their young children, Archie and Lilibet, were not just making a fleeting functional visit to British soil, but were dynamically moving toward a highly private, immensely significant destination in the heart of Gloucestershire. The target was Highgrove House, the beloved family estate that has served as a personal sanctuary for decades, a place filled with deep historical resonance and complex family memories. To keep up with this rapidly evolving story and to ensure you never miss the deep insights and breaking revelations from the inner circles of the monarchy, please take a brief moment right now to subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications as we continue to untangle this extraordinary web of modern royal history. As the morning progressed toward midday, the phones within the press enclosure began to ping with a relentless frequency, a sure sign that the highly coordinated machinery of the royal router was shifting into overdrive as mobile screens lit up with internal schedules and confidential alerts. For those journalists who remain deeply attuned to the daily movements of the sovereign, the pieces of this intricate puzzle were falling into place with astonishing mathematical precision, pointing toward a convergence that many traditionalists had deemed virtually impossible. The official notifications revealed that the king's public engagements in nearby Oxford were scheduled to conclude by 3:30 in the afternoon, leaving his diary entirely clear of any further formal appointments for the remainder of the day. Oxford sits a relatively short direct distance from the gates of Highgrove, while Birmingham placed the Duke a mere 90-minute drive away from the exact same countryside retreat, creating a perfect, undeniable geographical alignment that could not be dismissed as mere coincidence. The atmosphere among the traveling press shifted instantly from routine coverage of an athletic countdown to a frantic, high-speed logistical race as reporters and photographers realized that the true story of the day was no longer in the exhibition halls of Birmingham, but along the winding rural roads leading to the king's private residence. By 11:45, a mass exodus was underway, with media vehicles piling out of the exhibition center parking lots in a desperate bid to position themselves before the security gates of Highgrove, locked down for the evening. Yet, just as the media pack began to disperse toward Gloucestershire, a fascinating, highly strategic countermove was subtly launched from the household of the Prince and Princess of Wales, adding an entirely new layer of tension and narrative competition to an already chaotic day. Information began to filter out to select media outlets, indicating that William and Catherine were attending a charity polo match in the historic grounds of Windsor, an annual tradition that usually passes with predictable, elegant regularity. However, on this particular afternoon, the briefing contained a highly unusual, tantalizing suggestion that they might be bringing their children along to the match, a detail that immediately sent the permanent press photographers into a state of absolute panic. In the high-stakes world of royal photography, the fear of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, of missing a rare public appearance of the young royal children while chasing a hidden countryside meeting, is an agonizing, career-defining risk. The press corps found itself violently fractured in an instant, split between those racing south toward Windsor in search of a guaranteed family photo opportunity, and those hurtling toward Highgrove in the desperate hope of catching a fleeting glimpse of young Archie and Lilibet arriving at their grandfather's estate. It was a masterclass in media management and distraction, a visual chess game played out across the English countryside, while far away, high above the Irish Sea, the definitive confirmation of what had actually transpired was about to break. The tension that had been building across the English countryside reached its absolute climax just as wheels touched down on the tarmac in Dublin, where the digital world erupted with the message every royal correspondent had been holding their breath for. It was a formal background briefing transmitted directly to the Royal Rotor WhatsApp group, straight from the inner chambers of Buckingham Palace, carrying the immense, undeniable weight of official status. The text was clear, unambiguous, and monumental, confirming that the King and Queen had indeed hosted the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, alongside their children, Archie and Lilibet, at Highgrove House that very afternoon. This was not a fleeting digital greeting or a distant telephone call, but a physical face-to-face audience inside the sovereign's private sanctuary, marking the first time King Charles had seen his grandson Archie since the Platinum celebrations of 2022, and only the second time in history he had ever laid eyes on young Princess Lilibet. For years, the official narrative maintained a rigid, icy distance, but in the span of a single afternoon, the carefully constructed walls of royal isolation completely collapsed under the weight of a coordinated family arrival. To understand how this extraordinary breakthrough occurred, one must look back to the subtle warnings that had been vibrating through the media landscape for weeks. Beginning with exclusive revelations on major broadcast platforms, confirming that Meghan and the children would definitely accompany Harry on this high-stakes return to British soil, despite the endless logistical complications. the frantic legal maneuvers, and the intense public pushback that characterized the weeks leading up to this flight. Seasoned observers remained quietly confident that the Sussexes would never abandon this strategic opportunity to secure an audience with the king. The motivation driving this relentless pursuit of royal proximity is deeply tied to the shifting sands of their commercial ventures across the Atlantic, where the glittering promises of their initial American transition have begun to face the cold reality of corporate sustainability. If one contrasts the staggering financial heights of 5 years ago, when Hollywood studios and global streaming giants were eagerly writing checks worth hundreds of millions of dollars, with the current landscape, the downward trajectory becomes painfully obvious. The massive production deals that once defined their independence have slowed significantly, leaving behind a highly publicized backlog of unreleased material and commercial ventures that have struggled to find a foothold in a highly competitive global market. In the high-stakes world of global branding, the Sussexes have come to realize that their ultimate currency, their primary source of international fascination and commercial viability, remains their direct, undeniable connection to the ancient institution of the British monarchy. Without the physical validation of the sovereign, without the tangible proof that they are still fundamentally recognized by the head of state, the value of their media empire faces a continuous, unsustainable erosion. On the other side of this royal divide stands a monarch whose deeply ingrained emotional vulnerabilities have long been a defining characteristic of his personal and public life, creating a powerful opening for family intervention. Internal sources close to the king have consistently revealed a man who is secretly longing for a total reconciliation, a sovereign who views the deep, bitter rift down the middle of his family as an unimaginably catastrophic wound to the prestige of the institution he spent a lifetime waiting to inherit. Charles operates very much in the traditional philosophical vein of Queen Victoria, firmly believing that the royal family must present itself as the ultimate model of domestic unity and moral cohesion to the British public. This deep-seated desire to heal the family dynamic stands in massive structural opposition to the views of his eldest son and heir, creating a profound ideological divide within the palace walls regarding how to handle the ongoing Sussex challenge. The internal factions of the royal household have long been split down the middle, divided into distinct camps of hawks and doves who battle continuously for the king's ear and the direction of royal policy. Charles stands as the undisputed leader of the doves, heavily supported by his deputy private secretary, Theo Riefre, a diplomat who is actively being positioned to take over the top administrative role from the current leadership. The opposing faction, the traditionalist hawks led by senior advisors, views any concession to the California-based royals as a dangerous systemic mistake, aligning themselves completely with the unyielding stance of the Prince of Wales. This deep internal conflict boiled over during the High Society Week of Royal Ascot, just hours after international broadcasts confirmed that Meghan and the children were officially en route to the United Kingdom to join the Duke. It was amidst the glitz and glamour of the racecourse that royal courtiers and intimate friends of the king began to use a highly charged, incredibly toxic phrase, "behind closed doors," to describe the unfolding strategy, explicitly labeling the Sussex tactics as emotional blackmail. The traditional establishment was absolutely convinced that Harry and Meghan were using their young children as geopolitical leverage, attempting to bounce the vulnerable king into a sudden, unscripted meeting by weaponizing the natural grandfatherly affection of a man fighting a significant health battle. The hawks within the palace argued passionately that granting an audience under these conditions would set a disastrous precedent, signaling to the world that the crown could be successfully pressured if the stakes were made personal enough. Yet, despite the intense warnings of his most loyal advisors, despite the clear institutional risks outlined by the legal and administrative arms of the state, King Charles ultimately chose to open the gates of Highgrove, effectively paying the emotional ransom demanded of him. The official confirmation from Buckingham Palace proved that when forced to choose between the rigid protective protocols of the state and the instinctual sensitive desires of an aging grandfather, The king's emotional armor was simply too thin to resist. The profound strangeness of this situation lies in the fact that the palace apparatus was actively facilitating and organizing this encounter while simultaneously briefing the press about the intense psychological manipulation occurring behind the scenes. This curious alignment of contradictory behaviors reveals a monarchy that has been sending weak political signals for months, dropping subtle hints to attentive observers that a grand capitulation was always the intended destination of this royal drama. While the general public easily digests powerful, overt political signals, it is the quiet, almost imperceptible shifts in institutional behavior that reveal the true direction of historical events. Throughout the year, careful observers noted an unusual, highly strategic alignment between the public statements of the king and the independent initiatives of the Duke of Sussex, whether coordinating responses to major international crises or aligning their public charity work on sensitive global issues. A monumental, highly visible signal had actually been sent the previous year, when the media was mysteriously tipped off to photograph Harry arriving at Clarence's house for a brief meeting with his father, an event that triggered an immediate civil war between the palace factions. Following that encounter, the Hawks rushed to minimize the event, telling reporters that the meeting was brief, inconsequential, and completely exaggerated by the Sussex camp to create a false narrative of reconciliation. The Doves, however, countered with glowing reports, insisting it was a beautiful, transformative moment for a loving father, laying the quiet groundwork for the massive public step that took place today at Highgrove House. To truly comprehend the scale of the political capitulation that occurred within the walls of Highgrove, one must look directly at the extraordinary, almost unbelievable timing of this family reunion. Just 3 days prior to receiving his father's hospitality, the Duke of Sussex had launched a scathing, unprecedented public assault on one of the most senior and respected legal figures in the United Kingdom, Mr. Justice Nicklin. The judge, who was presiding over a massive, high-profile civil claim brought by Harry and several other prominent individuals against associated newspapers, had just delivered a devastating blow to the Sussex legal strategy by systematically throwing out all 97 of their collective claims. In the immediate aftermath of such a comprehensive legal defeat, standard constitutional protocol dictates that a member of the royal family should maintain a dignified, respectful silence, accepting the independence and integrity of the judiciary. Instead, the Duke issued an explosive public statement that read like a carbon copy of his previous attacks on the British establishment, explicitly labeling the High Court judgment as a complete and obvious whitewash. He pointedly accused the veteran judge of going to extraordinary, unwarranted lengths to exonerate the media conglomerate, a direct and highly damaging assault on the very foundations of His Majesty's courts and tribunal service. The judges of the realm dispensed justice explicitly in the king's name, meaning that Harry was effectively accusing his father's own judicial system of systemic corruption and institutional bias, under normal circumstances. Such an aggressive public attack on a senior judge, who is actively tipped for promotion to the Supreme Court, would make any official meeting with the head of state completely impossible, creating an unmanageable constitutional crisis. Royal advisors had spent days briefing the media that it would be highly inappropriate and constitutionally awkward for the king to host his son while these bitter legal battles were still actively burning. Yet, when the moment of truth arrived, King Charles demonstrated a complete and utter disregard for these traditional constitutional boundaries, inviting the man who had just insulted his judiciary to sit down for tea and family reconciliation. This stunning development reveals that the grand defense of constitutional propriety was nothing more than a fragile fig leaf, blown away the moment the king decided to prioritize his personal emotional needs over the institutional strength of the crown. There is simply no analytical version of this event where the sovereign emerges looking strong, strategic, or sensible. Rather, it portrays a monarch who has been completely and successfully manipulated by his youngest son. By opening the gates of Highgrove under these conditions, Charles has ignored the most famous, ancient warning of British history regarding the payment of tribute to invading forces. Once an institution establishes a precedent of paying the emotional ransom to halt an aggressive pressure campaign, the demands will only increase in frequency and intensity, locking the monarchy into a permanent cycle of appeasement. The long-term consequences of this decision are poised to inflict immense, irreversible damage on the position of the Prince of Wales, who now finds himself profoundly isolated and publicly undermined by his own father's policy. In a cruel twist of historical geography, Highgrove House is actually owned by the Duchy of Cornwall, meaning that Prince William is technically the landlord of the estate where this controversial meeting took place, with the king paying a formal rent to his eldest son to maintain the residence. Told this unauthorized, highly sensitive family summit on William's own property, while the Prince of Wales remains steadfastly opposed to any rehabilitation of the Sussexes, represents a massive, undeniable slap in the face to the heir to the throne. William has spent the last several years carrying the heaviest administrative and public burdens of the monarchy, remaining fiercely loyal to his father, maintaining total public silence during intense personal provocations, and working tirelessly alongside the Princess of Wales to keep the institution afloat. Yet, his reward for this unwavering loyalty is to watch the king completely dismantle the firm boundaries established at the historic Sandringham Summit, effectively granting Harry and Meghan exactly what they wanted from the very beginning. The Sussexes have successfully established a precedent where they can live in luxury abroad, commercialize their royal status through multi-million-dollar entertainment contracts, launch bitter public attacks against senior royals, and still retains full, unrestricted access to the head of state whenever their global brand requires a fresh injection of royal validation. This monumental shift in policy has set a clear, predictable template for the remainder of Charles's reign, with the next major public step already scheduled to unfold on British soil during the International Invictus Games next year. It will be virtually impossible for the king to resist standing shoulder to shoulder with his son on a public stage after welcoming him so warmly into his private home, marking the total official unraveling of Megxit. While the palace will continuously attempt to frame this narrative as an act of pure grandfatherly tenderness and Christian forgiveness, especially given the king's ongoing and deeply challenging battle with cancer, the public reality is far more cynical. The British domestic audience, the very people who buy the coronation mugs, line the historic streets for national celebrations, and keep the modern show on the road, are highly likely to view this move with a profound sense of disgust and betrayal. They see two intensely privileged individuals who built a global media empire by trashing their own family on international streaming platforms, complaining about their historic palaces, and publishing hundreds of pages of bitter invective, being rewarded with the highest honors the sovereign can bestow. The moral authority of the monarchy, which relies entirely on a delicate balance of duty, fairness, and institutional dignity, is being rapidly eroded under Charles's watch. A reality starkly reflected in recent national polling, which shows a terrifying 10% collapse in public support for the institution within just a few short years. By letting his natural vulnerabilities and deeply ingrained emotional needs dictate the official policy of the state, King Charles has taken a fragile, intact vase handed down to him by